The morning fog lingered over Ravenwood like a thick, wet blanket, a silent testament to the town's history of secrets. But Emma Hartwell barely noticed the mist swirling around her boots as she stood at the rusted iron gates of the old Granger estate. Her breath was shallow, eyes fixed on the weathered metal before her, her heart pounding in her chest. It had been almost a decade since her daughters, Ava and Lila, disappeared without a trace. 9 years of searching, of unanswered questions, of hollow assurances from the police. The case had grown cold. The town had moved on. But Emma hadn't. She couldn't. Not after that night. Not after everything she had lost. She could still remember the sound of the sirens, the cold concrete of the police station, the endless empty days that turned into weeks, and then months, and eventually years. The faded photographs, the missing persons posters pinned up on every light pole, their smiles frozen in time. The police had stopped looking long ago, declaring her daughters dead or lost to time. But Emma refused to believe it, not when she still felt them with her, when she still heard their laughter, saw their faces in her dreams, even though they were gone. And now, as she stood on the edge of Ravenwood, the world felt different. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness that had settled over the town like the fog itself, a quiet whispering in the back of her mind that someone was watching her. She couldn't shake the feeling that her search was no longer a quiet pursuit in the shadows. It was becoming something darker, something dangerous. Her gaze was drawn to the old Granger property, an estate that had been abandoned for years. The Granger name still carried weight in the town, but it was a name that held bitter memories for Emma. The Grangers had run the Ravenwood Brewery for decades, but after a string of scandals, including Raymond Granger's abrupt departure in the late 90s, it had gone under. No one had seen or heard from him since. It was a brewery that had tied Granger to the town, and, for reasons Emma couldn't yet articulate, it was a brewery that now drew her in. Emma took a step forward, her boots crunching on the dirt as she moved closer to the gates. They creaked in protest as she reached out to touch the cold metal. It had been years since anyone had bothered to care about this place, and now the silence that enveloped it felt suffocating. The property was overgrown, weeds and vines creeping up the sides of the dilapidated structures like the fingers of the past trying to claw their way back. The smell hit her suddenly, a sharp, almost sickeningly sweet odor that made her stomach lurch. Yeast, the same smell she remembered from when she was younger, from when the Granger Brewery had been alive and well. It was a scent that had always lingered in the air around Ravenwood, but it had been years since Emma had smelled it. She hadn't realized how much she missed it until now, and how much it made her skin crawl. But it wasn't just the yeast. There was something else, something foul mixed into it, the sharp, sour tang of decay. It curled into her nostrils, choking her. Her heart raced in her chest, and she wiped her brow as beads of sweat formed despite the cool air. What was it? What was that smell? The fog seemed to press in around her, closing the world off from all sides. Her hand trembled as she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the crumpled envelope she had found nailed to the post just moments earlier. Her stomach twisted as she stared at the crude handwriting scrawled across the yellowing paper. The message was simple, but the implications were enough to freeze the blood in her veins. You're searching in the wrong place. They are dead. Stop now or more will follow. The words echoed in her mind, each syllable feeling like a weight pressing down on her chest. They knew about her daughters. They knew everything. And whoever wrote this letter was no stranger to the darkness that had taken Emma's family. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew this was a warning, a threat. Her hands clenched around the letter, crumpling it in her grip. The anger surged through her, followed by a cold, tight fear that clenched in her gut. She couldn't stop. Not now. She had to keep going. She had to find out what happened to Ava and Lila. But this letter, it was just the beginning. The past, long buried, was clawing its way back to the surface, and Emma could no longer pretend she didn't hear it. A voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned sharply to find a man standing just behind her. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face familiar but weathered, like a stone that had been worn down by years of storms. It was Detective Mason Harper, the man who had promised her he would find the truth, the man who had worked the case for years, alongside countless others. Emma, Mason said, his voice low, filled with concern. "You can't be here." "I could be wherever I want," Emma snapped, her voice sharp, filled with a mix of exhaustion and desperation. She wasn't in the mood to listen to his caution. "I need to know who did this. I need to find them." Mason stepped forward, his eyes scanning the abandoned property, his brow furrowed as he looked back at her. "This isn't the way, Emma. Granger's long gone. The brewery's done." "But I've got a lead," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly, betray her attempt to remain strong. She shoved the crumpled letter into his hand, the words now burning in her mind, now burning between them both. This letter, whoever wrote it, they know something. They're connected to this place. And I think they're connected to the disappearance of my girls. Mason's face darkened as he read the letter, his jaw tightening. "You need to be careful," he said softly. "If someone's sending you threats, you're already in over your head." "I've been over my head for 9 years, Mason," Emma replied, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "This isn't just about me anymore. This is about them." Mason hesitated, then sighed, handing the letter back to her. "I'll help you, Emma," he said, "but you have to let me take the lead. We'll get this together. We'll figure out who's behind this." Emma shook her head. "No, this is my fight. I'll go alone if I have to." With that, she turned away, her heart pounding, the words still echoing in her mind. Stop now or more will follow. As the mist curled around her, Emma stepped forward, leaving Detective Hart behind. She was done waiting. The town may have forgotten, but she never would. Want to see what happens next? Subscribe to follow Emma's relentless search for the truth and more. The road to Granger Estate was long, winding, and lined with trees that seemed to lean in, as if whispering secrets of things long buried. Emma's car churned through mist, the headlights cutting through the thick fog, a faint glow that barely pushed back the darkness. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel, the knuckles white, her thoughts a blur of images. The crumpled letter, Mason's warning, the smell of yeast, and the unmistakable, haunting feeling that she was being watched. Every mile that passed brought her closer to the unknown. She had never been one for superstition, but tonight, something felt off. The house she had once called home now seemed like a distant memory, a place buried under layers of time and grief. Yet, the memories flooded her mind as she neared her destination. The laughter of her daughters as they ran through the backyard, the warmth of the kitchen on a cold winter's night, the mundane beauty of family life. Now, the house was just a shell of what it had once been, empty, abandoned, suffocated by the weight of its own decay. The Granger Estate, on the other hand, stood silent and watchful, as though it were alive, breathing in the mist and exhaling secrets of the past. As Emma pulled into the driveway, her headlights illuminated the overgrown path leading to the front door. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and brooding, a place that had been untouched for years. The windows were boarded up, the door sealed with a chain. The estate felt like an old wound, one that had never been properly tended to, infected with the rot of unresolved history. Emma took a deep breath, letting the air out slowly. The moment she'd been dreading, the moment she had feared, had arrived. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she had to be there. She couldn't stop herself. The car door creaked as she opened it, the cool air biting at her skin as she stepped out onto the gravel. Every footfall seemed louder than it should have been, the crunch of the stones beneath her boots a stark contrast to the stillness of a night. She stood for a moment, taking in the mansion's crumbling silhouette against the dark sky. Then, with a resolve she had known she still had, Emma moved toward the front door. Her hand hesitated over the rusted chain that secured the door. She should have called Mason. She should have waited. But she couldn't. Not anymore. There was no turning back. She pulled the chain free with a loud clang that echoed in the silence and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The musty smell of long-forgotten things lingered, and the wooden floors creaked under her weight. She paused at the threshold, scanning the darkened hallway, trying to make sense of the shadows that seemed to flicker and dance in the corners. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, the remnants of a once grand interior, now reduced to a shell. Emma stepped forward, each movement deliberate, cautious. She knew this place. She had been here once, Long ago, she remembered the lavish dinners, the laughter of the Granger family echoing through the halls. But that was before the bankruptcy, before Raymond Granger disappeared. Her heart raced as she moved deeper into the house, drawn toward the back of the estate, where she knew the brewery had once operated. The faint smell of yeast still lingered in the air, thick and overwhelming. But there was something else, something foul beneath it, something she couldn't place. She moved through the rooms, each one more decayed than the last, until she reached the back of the house. The brewery area was in ruins, its once functioning machines now rusted and broken. The floor was slick with grime, and the dim light from the overhead bulb barely illuminated the space. It felt like a tomb, a place where memories and secrets were buried. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she noticed something in the corner. A shadow. It was faint but unmistakable. She froze, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make out what it was. At first, she thought it was just another piece of debris, but then the shadow moved just slightly and her pulse quickened. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely a whisper. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. She took a step forward, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. There was something in that corner, something or someone. As she moved closer, the shadow grew clearer. It was a figure, hunched and still, almost as if it were waiting. Emma's heart thudded in her chest. She took another step, closer now, closer than she had ever been to the truth. And then, as if on cue, the figure moved. The dim light flickered, casting long, terrifying shadows across the room. Emma stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind racing. She should have run. She should have turned and never looked back. But she didn't. She couldn't. The figure stepped into the light, and Emma gasped in recognition. It was a man, older than she remembered, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. His clothes were ragged, torn, like he had been living in this place for far too long. "You shouldn't have come here," the man rasped, his voice hoarse and weak, but full of menace. "You've disturbed things that should have stayed buried." Emma's heart skipped a beat as she took a step back, her mind racing. Who was this man? And why did he know her? "Raymond Granger," she whispered, almost to herself. The man's lips curled into a twisted grin, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You found me," he said, his voice cold. "But now you'll wish you hadn't." Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, and the air grew thick with the scent of yeast and decay. The brewery, this place, wasn't just abandoned. It was a prison that held secrets darker than Emma had ever imagined. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close, not when the truth was right in front of her. Emma's hand shot out, grabbing the nearest object, an old, rusted pipe, and brandishing it like a weapon. Her pulse was racing as she stared down Raymond Granger, the man who had disappeared all those years ago, the man who had been the key to everything. And just as attention reached its peak, the lights flickered once more, and the entire room plunged into darkness. Emma's heart hammered in the dark. Her hand tightened around the rusted pipe as the shadows closed in, swallowing the dim light that had illuminated the room just moments before. The silence was overwhelming. It pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. She couldn't even hear her own breath, just the steady, dissonant hum of the place, the faintest were of something mechanical deep within the belly of the brewery. The figure of Raymond Granger had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. The cold, damp air clung to Emma's skin, seeping to the fabric of her clothes. She stood frozen, the pipe still gripped in her shaking hand, listening. The minutes stretched on, excruciatingly slow. The faint smell of stale beer and rot filled her nose, thick and suffocating. Had she imagined it? Had he truly been there? The stillness in the room was deafening, but then she heard it, a soft shuffle, like footsteps. Someone or something was moving. She couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it was too close. Every instinct told her to flee, but her legs refused to move. Emma's eyes darted around the room, desperately trying to pierce through the darkness. The faint light from the distant bulb flickered again, casting elongated shadows across the space. A groan echoed from somewhere deep within the warehouse, and Emma's pulse spiked. It wasn't just a noise, It was a cry, something that sounded both human and animal, something agonized, desperate. The noise came from the back of the warehouse, near the old storage area where the brewery's equipment had once been kept. Emma's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She wasn't sure if she was chasing the sound or running from it. Her breath quickened as she navigated the wreckage of the warehouse, careful not to trip over discarded machinery and broken furniture. The floor was slick with some kind of dark substance, a mix of oil and years of grime. The air smelled even worse here, cloying and rancid, like the stench of something that had died long ago. She finally reached the source of the noise, a narrow passageway that led deeper into the building. The walls were covered in mildew, the air thick with decay. But there, at the end of the passage, was a faint light, a glimmer from under a door, cracked open just enough for Emma to see it. The sound was louder now, a muffled, agonized cry. It was unmistakably human. Emma's stomach twisted as she approached the door. She had to know. She had to see it for herself, no matter what it was. With every step closer, her fear mounted, but so did her determination. She had to face whatever was on the other side of that door. For her daughters, for the truth. Reaching out, Emma grasped the handle, turning it slowly. The door creaked open, its hinges protesting the movement, the sound loud enough to echo through the empty room. She winced, but there was no turning back. The sight that met her eyes nearly made her heart stop. In the dim light of the room, Emma saw something that defied all reason. There, chained to the wall, was a figure, wild-eyed, gaunt, and covered in rags. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, his skin pale and stretched tight over bone. He didn't look like the man she had seen earlier. This one was different. He had the look of someone who had been trapped here for far too long, someone who had lost their humanity in the grip of madness. For a moment, Emma couldn't speak, couldn't move. She simply stared at the man, his wild eyes locked on her with an expression that was both pleading and feral. He was the source of the sound. He had been the one calling out for help. The man jerked his body in a futile attempt to reach her, his chains rattling as he struggled. Emma recoiled, instinctively stepping back, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. "Please, help," he rasped, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "You don't know what's down here." Emma's pulse thudded in her ears as the words settled into her mind. What was down here? Who was this man? And why had he been kept in chains? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Had Raymond Granger locked him away? Was he a prisoner, or had he been the one to do the imprisoning? The questions twisted in her brain, but no answers came. All she knew was that this man was desperate, and he was warning her about something. "What happened?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. The man's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. "It's him," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Granger. He's still here. Still." The words trailed off as a horrified look crossed his face. "You need to leave. You need to." Suddenly, the ground beneath Emma's feet seemed to tremble, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air. It was a sound so deep, so unnatural, that it sent a shiver racing up her spine. The warehouse seemed to come alive around her, the air vibrating with a growing tension. "What is that?" Emma asked, her voice rising in panic. The man's eyes widened in terror as the rumble grew louder. "It's him. It's..." His words were cut off as the room shook violently, and the lights overhead flickered and buzzed before plunging the warehouse back into darkness. Emma's heart raced, her body frozen in place as the rumbling intensified, echoing through the walls, the floor, the very air. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl, deep and menacing, coming from somewhere in the shadows, a sound that was not human. And just like that, the world around her collapsed into chaos. The man's voice echoed in her mind, his last warning drowning in the chaos. "He's still here." Emma turned and bolted for the door, the scream of the man behind her only adding to the horror that now consumed her. The darkness pressed in, suffocating her, but she couldn't stop. She had to get out. She had to. Boom! The explosion of sound shattered the air, and Emma stumbled, falling to the ground. The walls shook violently, and the rumble reached its crescendo. She could hear the wind whipping through the gaps in the walls. could feel the power of something ancient and alive rising up from the depths of the brewery. She didn't look back. The sky over Alderwood had been overcast for days, as though the town itself was trapped beneath a heavy, suffocating weight. Emma Hartwell hadn't returned to the settlement since she'd visited Paul Baxter, but she still felt the tight pull to land, the gravity of the memories she was seeking to escape. The further she ventured into Alderwood, the more she felt herself drawn into the past, the shadows of secrets that had stayed buried too long. She was no longer just a mother searching for answers. The tension had thickened now that Raymond Granger's name had been revealed. Each new discovery brought her closer to the truth and further away from the peace she had once taken for granted. She couldn't stop now. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. After her unsettling visit to the feed market, Emma drove through town toward the remnants of Ravenwood Brewery. The abandoned industrial site loomed before her, a grim reminder of Alderwood's lost potential. The paint on the crumbling brick walls peeled like old skin, exposing the raw, rusted skeleton of a place that had once aspired to life. The haunting scent of fermentation still lingered in the air. Emma swallowed the bile rising in her throat, thinking of the place where her daughters might have suffered. The brewery had been shut down for years, its legacy reduced to stories whispered in the dark corners of Alderwood's remaining bars. Raymond Granger's failed dream was the stuff of local lore. But now, it was something far more sinister, a place that seemed to feed on darkness, desperation, and fear. Emma parked her car at a distance and walked toward the perimeter. She could feel the walls closing in. The silence that had plagued her mind since her daughter's disappearance was beginning to crack, revealing the truth she had long feared to face. As she neared the warehouse, she saw the faintest movement in one of the broken windows. A figure, thin and skeletal, seemed to watch her from the shadows. Emma's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She quickly ducked behind a rusted metal dumpster, holding her breath. The figure didn't move for a long time, but Emma didn't dare leave her hiding spot. She could hear her pulse in her ears, her every breath feeling too loud for comfort. Was it Granger, one of his victims, or someone else, someone she hadn't counted on? After what felt like an eternity, the figure disappeared and the silence returned. She waited for another moment, then cautiously moved toward the warehouse. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still watching her. The entrance of the warehouse was tightly secured, the heavy iron doors bolted shut. Emma ran her fingers over the rusted surface. The lock was old, its mechanism stiff with neglect. Her eyes flicked toward the edge of the building, where shadows pooled like ink. The same sensation she'd had the first time she stepped onto Granger's property, the feeling of being stalked, gnawed at her. Every instinct screamed that she should turn back, but she couldn't. Emma pulled at the lock, frustration bubbling in her chest. It wouldn't budge. With a deep breath, she moved along the side of the warehouse, scanning the walls for an alternative entry point. Her fingers brushed over the brick surface, the rough texture sending a shiver up her spine. Then her hand stilled. There, half hidden by ivy, was a small gap between two rusted beams. It was barely big enough for her to slip through, but it was a way in. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust, the remnants of what had once been a place of industry, now decayed into obscurity. She could still smell the faint remnants of yeast in the air, but it was now overpowered by the rancid scent of mildew and decay. Emma took a step deeper into the shadows, the floor creaking under her weight. The temperature dropped as she moved further into the building, the stillness suffocating her. She could hear the sound of her own breath, the faint echo of her footsteps as she explored the interior. Old brewing equipment was scattered across the floor, covered in layers of grime and cobwebs. In the corner, a pile of discarded crates lay forgotten. But there was something else, something that made Emma's skin crawl. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a dim yellow glow over a dusty wooden table. On it lay a series of old photographs, yellowed with age. Some of them were familiar, faces from the settlement, some she recognized. Others were strangers, but one photo stood out. In the center was a picture of Raymond Granger, younger, standing with an Amish man who Emma didn't recognize. They were both smiling, posing in front of the very brewery Emma had been investigating. The photo was dated 1994. Her heart skipped a beat. This was more than a failed brewery. This was a link, a connection between Granger and the Amish community. But who was the man standing beside him? Emma picked up the photograph, staring at the faces frozen in time. Something about the man's smile made her stomach churn. He looked too familiar. She scanned the other photos, trying to piece together the puzzle. There had to be a connection, a reason why these photos were kept. And then the answer hit her like a bolt of lightning. It was Raymond's brother. She had heard rumors. There had been talk of a family dispute years ago, but Emma had never thought much of it. Now, standing in this forgotten corner of the world, she realized that the answers she sought were connected to this family feud. But as the realization hit her, she froze. A figure stood in the doorway, blocking the only exit. Raymond Granger. He had been watching her. Raymond Granger stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the dimly lit interior of the warehouse. For a moment, Emma's heart froze. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed his presence until it was too late. The air between them felt thick, charged with the tension of unspoken years. His eyes, cold, hollow, locked onto hers, and for the first time, Emma understood the depth of the danger she was truly in. Her fingers tightened around the photograph, her grip turning white-knuckled as she tried to steady her breath. Raymond's gaze shifted from the photo in her hand to her face, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low, gravelly. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of something ancient and unforgivable. "You think you can just waltz in and uncover my past? You think it'll be that simple?" Emma swallowed hard, but her voice held firm. "You're the one who's been hiding, hiding behind that damn brewery, behind these lies." She took a small step back, her eyes scanning the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. But the old warehouse was almost entirely bare. Raymond chuckled, a sound as dry as the dust that covered the floor. "Lies!" His laughter echoed, bouncing off the walls like a haunting refrain. What if the truth is far worse than you imagine? What if there's something much darker at play here, Emma? Something you won't even understand until it's too late. He took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Emma's heart raced. This man, this broken man, had been part of the nightmare that had haunted her for so long. The man who had taken her daughters. The man who had brought so much destruction to the people she loved. "Why are you doing this?" Emma whispered, her voice quivering despite her resolve. "Why my family? Why the others? What did we ever do to you?" Raymond's face darkened. "You don't get it, do you?" He stepped closer, his presence overpowering. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than your damn family. This goes back years, back to when you weren't even part of this town." The words echoed in Emma's mind, and she felt a chill crawl down her spine. He wasn't just talking about her daughters anymore. He was talking about something much larger, something that had been brewing long, before she even arrived in Alderwood. "You and your people," Raymond continued, "you don't know the truth about this town, the history that's buried in its bones. You don't understand the power that runs through it, the things that were done to protect it." "Protect it?" Emma repeated, her mind racing. "What the hell are you talking about?" Raymond smiled again, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was something darker, more dangerous. "I'm talking about the curse, Emma. The one that's been here for generations. The one your family walked into, without even knowing it." Her pulse quickened, her mind struggling to catch up to his words. A curse? Was he mad? Was this some sort of sick fantasy? But before she could respond, Raymond's expression shifted. The cold, calculating demeanor faded, and something else took its place. Something more desperate, more feral. "You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to know," he growled, his voice rising. "The moment you came here, you unleashed something. And now it's coming for you." Emma's breath hitched, her body tense, frozen in place. The air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating, as though something ancient was stirring beneath the earth, responding to Raymond's words. "You're a fool, Emma," he spat. "You've opened the door. There's no going back now. You wanted to find answers, but now all you've done is awaken the darkness." The weight of his words hit her like a slap. A curse? Darkness? Her mind raced, trying to process the madness that Raymond was spewing. She thought of her daughters, of their disappearance. Was it possible that all of this, Granger, the brewery, the mysterious history of Alderwood, was part of something far worse? Was this about more than just a man's vendetta? Was there something supernatural at play? Emma took a deep breath, her mind grappling with the idea that maybe, just maybe, Raymond was telling the truth. A curse. The very thought made her skin crawl, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. "You're lying," she said, the words coming out with a strength she didn't know she had. "You're just trying to scare me." Raymond's face twisted into something resembling pity. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice soft now, almost coaxing. "Fine, I'll give it to you." He took a step back, his eyes darkening, as though a shadow had passed over his soul. "The curse of Alderwood began long before I was born. It was placed on this town by the first settlers. A promise, a blood oath, forged in the shadows. Every generation since has lived under its weight, unwilling to face what was done. Your family is tied to it, Emma. Your blood is part of it." The room felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in. Emma's breath quickened as she tried to make sense of his words. Was this the real reason her family had been drawn into this town? The reason her daughters had been taken? "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "You're trying to tell me that my family has some sort of curse tied to it? That my daughters—" Raymond nodded slowly. "Your daughters were never meant to be part of this world. They were caught in the crossfire of something older than you can understand. And now they're trapped, like so many others before them." Emma's hands began to tremble as the truth, whatever it was, began to take shape. Could it really be true? Was everything she had suffered a result of something older, darker than she had ever realized? Before she could respond, Raymond's eyes narrowed. "But you won't get far, Emma. No one does. Everyone who's tried to unravel the mystery of Alderwood has ended up broken, lost, or worse." A heavy silence fell between them. Then, with a flick of his hand, Raymond turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. Emma's heart raced as the weight of his words pressed against her chest. What had he meant? What was the curse he spoke of? The terrifying unknown loomed before her, and though she wanted to run, to escape, she knew she couldn't. Not yet. She had to find her daughters. She had to understand what Raymond meant by this curse. She couldn't let fear stop her. Not now. The silence after Raymond's departure felt suffocating. Emma stood in the abandoned warehouse, the dust settling in the air around her, thick with the oppressive atmosphere of secrets long buried. The faint hum of machinery in the distance was the only sound, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone. Not really. Something else lurked in these walls, in the very soil beneath her feet. Something older, darker, and more dangerous than anything she had imagined. With a deep breath, Emma turned and scanned the warehouse, her mind racing through everything Raymond had said. A curse, blood oaths, her family tied to Alderwood's dark history. It all seemed so fantastical, like something pulled from the pages of a twisted fairy tale. But the way Raymond had spoken, with such certainty, made it impossible for Emma to dismiss. She needed to know more. The room was dimly lit, its few weak bulbs flickering intermittently, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The walls were covered in grime and peeling paint, but there was something hidden here. Emma could feel it in her bones. She needed to search deeper, to peel back the layers of this forgotten place, and see what truths were waiting to be uncovered. Her eyes fell upon the far corner of the warehouse, where an old, rusted filing cabinet stood against the wall. It looked out of place in the otherwise empty space, an anachronism left behind by time. Emma hesitated for a moment. Could there be something inside it? Something that could explain the curse, or at least the strange hold Alderwood had over her family. Her footsteps echoed as she crossed the room, each step a reminder of how much she was risking. The cabinet creaked as she opened the top drawer, the smell of mildew and old paper filling her nostrils. Inside, there were stacks of faded papers, notes, records, receipts, all long since forgotten. She rifled through them quickly, her fingers trembling as she skimmed the first few pages. There were business records for Ravenwood Brewery, but nothing that seemed out of place. Then, at the very bottom of the drawer, she found something different. A folder, its edges worn and frayed, marked with the word Confidential. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She pulled it out, her pulse quickening as she opened it. The first page was a map, intricately drawn, its details nearly impossible to make out in the dim light. But something about it felt significant. Its markings were precise, deliberate, as though whoever had created it knew exactly what they were doing. Beneath the map were pages of handwritten notes. The ink was faded, smudged in places, but the message was clear. The blood of the first settlers binds the town. Only through sacrifice will the curse be broken. The words hit her like a physical blow. A blood sacrifice. Emma's stomach churned at the thought, but she forced herself to read on. The rest of the notes seemed to describe a ritual, a ceremony tied to the town's founding, one that had been passed down through generations. Each family bound to land by a vow made in blood. Only through sacrifice. Her thoughts raced. Had her family been a part of this? Was her bloodline somehow tied to the curse Raymond had spoken of? The possibilities were terrifying. The weight of the history that had been hidden in this town began to press down on her, suffocating her with its darkness. She slammed the folder shut, a sense of urgency washing over her. She needed to get out of the warehouse, to think, to process what she had just uncovered. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye, an old, dusty trunk in the farthest corner of the room. The lock was broken, the hinges rusted. It was a kind of forgotten relic that shouldn't have been left behind, a remnant of a past that someone had wanted to keep hidden. Emma approached it cautiously. The trunk was heavy, and as she opened it, a wave of stale air hit her. Inside were stacks of old books, their covers worn and yellow with age. She picked up the first one, the title barely legible, The Origins of Alderwood, a history of the town and its founding families. This was it, the key to everything. With shaking hands, Emma began to leaf through the pages. The book was filled with cryptic references to sacrifices, rituals, and the hidden truths of Alderwood's founding families. The more she read, the more she realized how little she truly knew about the town she had called home for so long. The final page of the book was particularly unsettling. It described a ritual that had taken place in the town's early days, one that involved the binding of a family's blood to the land. The town's prosperity had been ensured by this unholy pact, but it came at a cost, the lives of the innocent, and the curse that followed. The bloodline of the first settlers will always be bound to this land. Only through death will the curse be broken. Emma's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't some forgotten myth. It was the truth. Her family was tied to this curse, whether they wanted to be or not. Her mind reeled with the implications. Was she, too, part of this twisted pact? Was this why her daughters had been taken? Were they part of some sick ritual that had gone on for generations? Before she could digest any more, the sound of a car engine pulling into the warehouse yard broke her concentration. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. She wasn't alone anymore. If you've been hooked so far, there's more, so much more, you haven't heard yet. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next twist in this story, or the next one I uncover. The engine's rumble grew louder as it approached the warehouse, growing ominously closer. Emma's pulse quickened, and her breath hitched in her chest. She quickly shut the trunk with a sharp snap, almost dropping the old book in her haste. There wasn't enough time to process everything. Not enough time to make sense of the twisted secrets buried in Alderwood soil. Her first instinct was to run, to flee back into the overgrown brush that surrounded the dilapidated building. But that wasn't an option, not anymore. The door of the warehouse creaked open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside. His silhouette was cast in shadow, but Emma's gut twisted as she recognized him immediately. Raymond Granger. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stood frozen, the sound of his boots echoing off the concrete floor as he approached. The warehouse felt suffocating, the stale air suddenly thick with tension. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to hide, to escape this man who had brought her to the brink of unraveling everything she thought she knew about her family. But there was no running from him now. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning the dark interior, lingering for a moment on the trunk Emma had just closed. He didn't look surprised to find her there. Instead, he smirked, his lips curling into something that almost resembled a grimace. "I knew you'd come," Raymond said, his voice low and gravelly, like the sound of the earth grinding beneath an ancient weight. Emma didn't move, her eyes narrowing as she fought to control the fear rising inside her. She couldn't let him see her weakness. Not now. You shouldn't be here, Raymond continued, his voice tinged with an almost bored disinterest, as if this was all routine for him. Alderwood isn't a place for people like you, people who want to unravel its secrets. Some things are better left buried, don't you think? Emma opened her mouth, but no words came out. The weight of the history she had uncovered, the truth buried in the land, was too much to bear. It was all too much. She had thought she could handle it, thought she could confront it, but facing Raymond now, seeing him in the flesh, his presence more intimidating than she had imagined, was different. You think you're going to stop this, Raymond said, stepping closer, his gaze piercing through her. That you're going to undo what's been set in motion. His laugh was soft, almost sadistic. It's too late for that. You can't erase the past, Emma. Not the blood that's been spilled here. Not the curse that's been binding this town for centuries. Emma's blood turned to ice. He knew her name. You've been digging around in places you don't understand, he continued, his voice growing more intense. And you found more than you should have. You think you can stop it all with a few old books, with your empty threats and bravado. But the truth is, the blood runs deep in this town. Deeper than you or I will ever know. Raymond's words rang in her ears as he moved closer. He was toying with her now, using his knowledge of her fears and her vulnerabilities to control her. He could see the doubt in her eyes, the creeping realization that everything she thought she knew about Alderwood's history was a lie. You think your daughters are innocent? He sneered, taking another step forward. They're not. They're part of it, just like you. Emma's breath hitched. Her body trembled as the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had suspected as much, but hearing him say it aloud made it all too real. The curse, the ritual, the bloodline, he continued, his words dripping with venom. They were taken for a reason, Emma. Your daughters. They're not just victims. They're pawns in a game that's been going on far longer than either of us have been alive. And when the time comes, when the blood is spilled, you'll see. Emma shook her head, refusing to believe what he was saying. But deep down, a part of her knew that he wasn't lying. The pieces were falling into place, each revelation more horrifying than the last. Her daughters weren't just innocent victims. They were part of this twisted legacy, part of the price that had been paid for Alderwood's prosperity. Raymond took another step forward, his face now mere inches from hers. His breath was hot against her skin, and she could smell the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face with a cold, deliberate touch. You should have stayed away, Emma, he whispered, his voice soft, almost affectionate. But you couldn't, could you? You couldn't resist the lure of the truth. And now it's too late. You've already sealed your fate. With those chilling words, he turned on his heel, heading for the door without another glance at her. Emma stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched him disappear into the night. Her mind was spinning, her thoughts a chaotic blur. There was no turning back now. Raymond had made that clear. The curse, the bloodline, the ritual, it was all real. But Emma wasn't ready to give up. She wasn't ready to let Alderwood win. The truth was out there, buried deep beneath the surface. She had to find it. She had to save her daughters. She could feel the weight of the town's dark history pressing in on her. But she refused to let it break her. She wasn't done. Not yet. The night was heavy, thick with the promise of danger. Emma stood at the threshold of the abandoned Ravenwood brewery, her heart hammering in her chest as her eyes scanned the darkened landscape. She had crossed a line, one she could never uncross. There was no going back. Not now. The truth was too close. But with every step, every breath, the weight of what she was about to do pressed down harder. The brewery, once a symbol of prosperity, had now become a dark enigma, a place where secrets festered like open wounds. Samuel Cross, the driver she had reluctantly hired, had been her only companion in the journey so far. He had driven her to the outskirts of the town, where the brewery loomed in the distance, like a sleeping monster waiting for the right moment to strike. But she couldn't stop now. Raymond Granger had made it clear that the game was far from over. He had thrown down the gauntlet, daring her to uncover what lay beneath the surface of Alderwood's curse. And she couldn't resist. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, Emma stepped off the dusty road, her footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth as she made her way toward the rusted gate. The brewery's imposing structure loomed before her, like a forgotten relic of a past she couldn't fully grasp, its windows boarded up, its walls sagging with the weight of time. But there was something alive in the place, something that had never truly died. The wind whispered through the trees, carried with the faintest scent of stale beer and decayed wood. Emma fought the urge to gag as she approached the fence, its barbed wire glinting faintly in the dim moonlight. Her heart pounded as she slid through the narrow gap between the fence posts, her body trembling with anticipation. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she knew the truth had to lie inside. As she made her way toward the warehouse, the sense of dread grew stronger. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, as though the ground beneath her was alive, watching her every move. The stale air grew thicker, and with each breath, Emma felt as though the very walls of the brewery were closing in on her. The warehouse door was ajar. The gap between the rotting wood was just wide enough for Emma to slip through unnoticed. The light from a half-hidden moon cast long shadows on the floor, and as she stepped inside, the overwhelming scent of fermentation and decay hit her like a physical blow. She paused, her eyes straining in the dim light. The interior of the warehouse was a labyrinth of old machinery, rusted pipes, and crates that had long since lost their labels. The air was stagnant, heavy with the smell of neglect. But it wasn't the emptiness that unsettled her. It was a feeling that something had been left behind. Something or someone. Her heart skipped a beat as she caught sight of something strange. A trail of muddy footprints leading toward the far end of the warehouse. The footsteps were fresh, almost too fresh. They were large, uneven, and they stopped abruptly at a set of double doors that led deeper into the building. Without hesitation, Emma followed the trail, her mind racing. Could this be the path Raymond had taken during his mysterious visits? Was this where he had hidden his darkest secrets? She was close. She could feel it. Her gut told her that everything would change the moment she stepped through those doors. As she reached for the handle, the faintest noise made her freeze, a scrape of metal against concrete. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes darted toward the shadows. A figure stepped out from the dark corner, and Emma's blood ran cold. It was Raymond. His broad frame filled the doorway, his face unreadable. He hadn't seen her yet, but he was moving toward the far end of the warehouse, where the trail of footprints ended. For a moment, Emma's heart raced in her throat. She should hide, slip away into the darkness, and disappear into the night. But something told her she needed to confront him. She stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Raymond." He froze. The sound of her voice in the quiet of the warehouse felt like a thunderclap. Slowly, he turned, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across his face. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice low, almost a purr. "Always curious, always digging. But I think you've dug too deep this time." Emma took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "What's in there, Raymond? What have you been hiding?" He glanced toward the double doors, his expression briefly flickering with something, fear or perhaps guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor as he spoke in a low, menacing tone. "You don't want to know," he said. "Trust me, Emma. Some things are better left buried." Emma's mind raced, her instinct screaming at her to turn away. But she couldn't. She couldn't back down now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. "I need to know," she whispered, almost pleading. "For my daughters. I need to know what's really going on here." Raymond's smile faltered for a moment. He looked almost sad. It was a strange look on a man who had done so much to bury the past, to shroud it in darkness. But as quickly as a moment passed, his expression hardened again, the walls he had built around himself slamming back into place. "You're wasting your time," he spat. "The past can't be undone. You can't save your daughters. They were never meant to be saved." Emma's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. She had always known that something dark was tied to her daughters, but hearing Raymond say it, so coldly, so matter-of-factly, cut deeper than anything she had imagined. Before she could respond, Raymond turned his back to her. But you'll find out soon enough. You'll see just how deep this goes. Emma stared at his retreating figure, her body trembling. Her worst fear had been realized. Her daughters weren't just victims of circumstance. They were part of something far darker, something ancient, and no matter how hard she fought, she wasn't sure she could win. She stepped closer to the double doors, her heart pounding in her chest as she grabbed the cold metal handle. And then the ground beneath her feet began to shake. The ground trembled beneath Emma's feet, a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. For a moment, she thought it was her heart racing, the pounding echo of her fear reverberating in her chest. But the tremor grew stronger, the sound of something mechanical starting up deep within the bowels of the warehouse. It was as though the entire building was coming to life, waking up from a long slumber, ready to reveal its dark secrets. Raymond Granger's words echoed in her mind, the chill of his final statement sinking deep into her soul. You'll see just how deep this goes. She stood there frozen, staring at the double doors in front of her. The noise grew louder, more insistent, metal grinding against metal, the screech of machinery long unused. It was coming from behind the doors. Emma's hand clenched tighter around the cold metal handle, her fingers shaking with the weight of what she was about to do. What was Raymond hiding in there? Was it something that could explain everything? Her daughters, the strange connection to the Ravenwood Brewery, the unmistakable smell of decay. Every instinct screamed that this was it. This was the moment she had been searching for. She pushed the doors open. The smell hit her first, the sharp tang of old beer mixed with something much darker, something more rancid. It was the smell of death. The stench seemed to crawl up her nostrils, clogging her senses, threatening to choke her. But Emma forced herself to breathe through it. She stepped forward into the dimly lit room, the air thick and stagnant. Inside was a cavernous space, the high ceiling lost in shadows. The floor was covered in layers of dust, the remnants of old machinery scattered like forgotten bones. But it was the walls that drew her eye, covered in yellowed papers, old blueprints, and photographs pinned in haphazard patterns. There was no order here, no method to the madness. It looked like the work of a man obsessed, a mind unraveling. And then her gaze landed on the center of the room. A large, rusted cage stood in the middle, its iron bars twisted and warped. Inside, a single, motionless figure lay on the cold concrete floor, bathed in the faint light that filtered through the cracks in the walls. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath her feet. It was a woman. Her body was thin, frail, her skin pale and drawn tight over the bones. Her clothes were torn, stained with something dark, something that Emma couldn't quite place. Her hair was matted, streaked with dirt, and her face was the face of someone who had been through hell and back. But it was the eyes that sent a chill through Emma's spine. Even though the woman was unconscious, or perhaps just barely alive, her eyes were wide open, unseeing, staring into the void. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew this woman. She had seen her before. It was her daughter, Iva. No, it couldn't be. But as Emma knelt beside the cage, her eyes scanned the pale face, the same features, the same expression. Iva had been missing for so long. She couldn't be here. She couldn't be alive. The thought was impossible, a sick joke that she could barely accept. But as Emma reached out, her trembling hand brushing against the cold metal bars, a small, guttural sound escaped from Iva's lips, a weak, shuddering breath. Emma's heart surged. She was alive. She was still alive. The tears came unbidden, hot and furious. Emma's mind swirled with questions, her thoughts tangled in confusion. How? Why was she here? What had Raymond done to her? The truth that Emma had so desperately sought, the answers that had seemed so far out of reach, now lay before her in the form of a broken, half-dead child. Raymond's voice broke the silence. You shouldn't have come here, Emma. Emma jerked back, her pulse spiking in panic. Raymond stood in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the light from the warehouse. His face was grim, his eyes dark and cold. He wasn't the man she had known, the man who had once run a brewery. This man was something else entirely, a predator. You're too late, he said softly. Iva was never meant to be found. She was never meant to survive. Why? Emma's voice was hoarse, a strangled whisper. Why her? Why my daughters? What is this place? Raymond stepped closer, his expression hardening. This is where it all started. The Ravenwood Brewery was never just a business. It was a cover, a front for something far darker, something ancient. And your daughters? They were always meant to be part of it. Emma shook her head, disbelief written across her face. What are you talking about? Raymond's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. I was part of a project, a secret experiment. Ravenwood wasn't just a brewery. It was a place to hide the truth. And the truth was, they were trying to create something immortal. Emma's stomach churned as his words sank in. What are you saying? This is impossible. Oh, it's very possible, Raymond continued, his voice low and sinister. The brewing process was never about beer. It was about something much darker, alchemy, ritual. We were trying to unlock the key to eternal life. And your daughters, Emma? They were part of the plan. The final part. Emma's mind reeled, the horror of his words crashing over her like a wave. Immortality? Alchemy? She had suspected something was wrong, something beyond her understanding. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Raymond took another step toward her, his eyes gleaming with something far darker than she had ever seen. You see, Emma, your family was chosen, and I'm not finished with them. Not yet. In that moment, Emma realized the truth. Her daughters weren't just victims. They were pawns in a game far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The nightmare had only just begun. The cold air in the warehouse hung heavy with the scent of decay, mingling with the sharp tang of stale beer and the metallic scent of blood. Emma stood frozen, her mind racing to keep up with the chaos unfolding in front of her. Raymond Granger's words still echoed in her mind, his claim about immortality, the dark experiments, and the twisted fate that had been forced upon her daughters. She reached for the cage that held Iva, but Raymond was faster, stepping between them with sudden, terrifying speed. The dark light in his eyes flickered with something unnatural, something that didn't belong in any human being. The man in front of her was no longer just Raymond Granger, the failed brewer. He had become something else to the monster. You don't understand, Emma, Raymond said, his voice unnervingly calm. This is bigger than your family. This is bigger than anything you can comprehend. What I've done, it's not just about survival. It's about transcendence. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath shallow, but she forced herself to stand tall. You don't get to play God. Not with my daughters. Not with anyone. Her voice, though shaky, rang out with unexpected strength. She had already lost so much. She wasn't going to let him take Iva or anyone else from her. Raymond laughed darkly, a low, unsettling sound that sent shivers down her spine. Play God? No. What I've done is more than that. It's resurrection, Emma. I've already brought back the dead once. And now it's your turn. He stepped back, raising his hand toward the shadows at the far end of the room. The machinery around them hummed louder, as if to answer his summons. The walls, once dilapidated and abandoned, now seemed to pulse with sinister energy. Emma's eyes darted from Raymond to Iva's cage, her heart swelling with panic. The door was only a few feet away. She had to get her daughter out of there. But something else had shifted in the atmosphere. The air felt thicker, the shadows deeper, as if the very walls were closing in on her. The temperature dropped. From the corner of the warehouse, a figure emerged. Emma's blood ran cold. It was Iva, or at least it looked like her. The girl who stood before her wasn't the Iva she knew, the vibrant, strong-willed child she had raised. This girl was pale, her eyes wide and empty, her skin stretched too tight over her bones. She walked toward them slowly, her feet dragging as if she were not quite in control of her movements. The creature in front of Emma was not her daughter. It was something that had been created, something born of darkness. Iva, Emma whispered, her throat thick with emotion, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it stopped just in front of Raymond, who watched with an odd sense of pride. She was the first, Raymond said, his voice soft, almost affectionate, the first to survive the process. the first to become something more. Emma's breath hitched as the full weight of his words crashed down on her. You've done this to her? Her voice cracked. What did you do to my daughter? Raymond didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on Iva's shoulder, as if guiding her. I didn't just do this to her, Emma. I gave her life again. The process, alchemy, resurrection, whatever you want to call it. It's more than just a science. It's an art. I created something new with her, something that can't die. She is a bridge to the future. Iva's blank stare never wavered as she stood before Emma, the life in her eyes flickering faintly, like a candle in the wind. No, Emma whispered, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. You didn't create life. You destroyed it. She's not alive. She's not my daughter. Raymond's lips twisted into a thin smile. That's where you're wrong, Emma. She is your daughter. Just better. A chill ran down Emma's spine, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow darker, colder. The machinery behind her hummed louder, vibrating through the floor. She could feel the weight of it in her bones, the weight of 100 broken promises, 100 shattered dreams. But she couldn't let this stand. She couldn't let him win. Emma's eyes darted to the workbench against the far wall, where old tools and equipment lay scattered. She spotted a rusted crowbar, its edge glinting in the dim light. Without thinking, she lunged for it, her hand shaking but determined. As she grasped the cold metal, the sound of Iva's breathing, if it could even be called breathing, grew louder, more labored. She turned to face Raymond, her heart pounding. You're not going to get away with this, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. I'll stop you, Raymond, no matter what it takes. Raymond raised an eyebrow, almost intrigued by the defiance in her voice. Stop me? You can't even stop yourself from falling into my trap. You're too late, Emma. Everything is already set in motion. Your daughters were never meant to be found. The experiment is already underway. You're too far behind to stop the process now. I'm not afraid of you, Emma said, taking a step forward, holding the crowbar tightly in her hands. And I'm not afraid of whatever you've turned Iva into. She's still my daughter, and I'll fight for her. I'll fight for both of my daughters. Raymond chuckled darkly, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You think you can undo what I've done? You think this is just about saving one little girl? It's not. You're fighting something much bigger than you. The words hung in the air like a curse. Before Emma could react, the machinery behind Raymond roared to life, shaking the warehouse. It was a deafening sound. Something alive, something mechanical, and something terrifying. Emma rushed toward Iva, her hand outstretched, ready to grab her daughter from the cage. But before she could reach her, Iva, no, the thing that resembled her, spun around, her empty eyes locking onto Emma's. She reached out, her fingers like iron, gripping Emma's arm with an unnatural strength. The world around Emma seemed to slow. She could feel the coldness of Iva's grip, the unnatural stillness in the air. Her heart raced, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She twisted the crowbar in her hand and, with all the strength she had left, slammed it against the bars of the cage. The metal rang out, a harsh, sharp sound, but it was enough. The cage rattled, and Iva recoiled in pain, letting go of Emma's arm just for a moment. That moment was enough. Emma grabbed Iva's limp form, pulling her out of the cage and to the floor. Her heart beat wildly as she looked into her daughter's pale face, the faintest flicker of recognition in her eyes. Iva, listen to me, Emma said, her voice desperate. You're my daughter. You're not a monster. You have to come back to me. The noise from the machinery intensified, the walls of the warehouse shaking as Raymond's plan began to unfold. But Emma wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let him take her daughter from her again, with all the strength she had. Emma fought to pull Iva to her feet, dragging her out of the warehouse, away from the hell Raymond had created. But the shadows were closing in, and as she looked over her shoulder, she saw Raymond stepping forward, a twisted smile on his lips. Run, Emma, he said softly. Run. But you can't escape what I've made. No one can. The door slammed shut behind them, the night air hitting Emma like a cold wave. But there was still one thing left to do. She had to stop Raymond. And she would, because this fight is far from over.